What do you get when you cross a melon and broccoli?
What?
A melancholy snack. Don't laugh, it's sad.
It was really sad.
Hungry Squared, bringing you the best food talk anywhere.
Welcome to the Hungry Squared podcast, where the brain and belly meet. I'm Sharon from the Wasatch Cooking Guide.
And I'm Winter from theredparty.com. This week, we are talking all about the history of cookbooks, you guys, with our special guest, Anna Curran of Cookbook Create.
What's Cookbook Create?
We'll talk about it.
Squared, yeah, Hungry Squared.
Okay, Sharon, how has your week been? Did you eat anything good this week?
I had a snack this week. I had a really good treat on Friday.
Okay.
Because it was the end of my really tough work week.
Yes.
I had a lot of stuff going on at work. So I decided to treat myself.
Treat yourself.
And I went and got a frozen concrete custard.
From?
Freddy's.
Freddy's?
Yeah.
I've never heard of Freddy's before.
Oh, it's a chain.
Oh,
so you probably have a Freddy's near you, listeners.
Oh, okay.
And they have frozen custard. They specialize in steak burgers, which are pretty good.
Okay.
And they have frozen custard there.
I love frozen custard.
So I got a chocolate brownie.
Oh,
concrete.
Yeah. So wait, is it was it chocolate custard also?
Chocolate custard
with the brownie
fudge
mixed in.
Brownie.
Oh yeah.
It's good.
That sounds heavenly.
Yeah. So it was yummy.
I'm glad, because sometimes you have to have a nice sweet treat at the end of a tough week.
You do.
At work.
Treat yourself.
Treat yourself.
Did you treat yourself this week? What did you eat?
Well, I ate something that Lee made, of course. He makes a lot of the food I eat, and it's wonderful. He makes the best potatoes, the best roasted potatoes ever, though.
Really?
Yes, because he does this thing to it. So, and he hasn't made it for a while, but I was like, oh my gosh, these are the best potatoes. And the recipe, or how the technique, he got it from, I believe it was from Cook's Country, like America's Test Kitchen and Cook's Country.
So what's the technique? Why are they so great?
So he chops them up, but then he gets the water boiling and puts a little bit of baking soda in the water while he boils them. And I should look this up, and maybe I will have these in the show
How long
notes.
does he boil them? Are they done before he roasts them?
Yeah, he gets them pretty, I think it's like pretty tender.
Oh, okay.
But something with the baking soda brings out the starches, because then when he puts them into the oven to finish off the roasting part, they get super crispy on the outside and super soft on the inside. They're so good. Like that's my ideal potato. Yum.
Yummy.
I know, it was so good. I'll find the recipe and try and figure out the science, because there's a something to that, because that's how like pretzels are made. You put into a baking soda water or something or another. So, and it kind of creates something on the outside so that it becomes kind of crunchy on the outside, but then chewy on the inside.
Right.
Yeah, but those potatoes. Oh
yummy.
Man, it was a good week.
And now for the main course.
Let's get down to the topic at hand. We have an interview today.
Yes, and we are interviewing Anna Curran from something called the Cookbook Create. It's an online place where you can create your own cookbook. She is the CEO and founder of Cookbook Create. She started in 2012, and I met her at a conference, and she's delightful, but she wanted to kind of create this place where you could meld the old with a written cookbook with the new technology that we have nowadays, right?
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So a new way to do like a family cookbook or your own.
Yep, exactly. And so they've kind of won some awards and stuff like that. They actually produced the official 2014 South by Southwest Interactive Cookbook.
What?
I know, cool, huh? And in 2014, they won the Ultralight Startup Pitch Competition. So they've done a lot of cool stuff, and they make beautiful cookbooks. I mean, you make it, but it ends up being a beautiful cookbook that you can have and pass down to your family. So we're excited to talk about this. We wanted to let you guys know about a little bit about her story, but also she has so much knowledge about cookbooks, you guys. She's done a ton of research on cookbooks. So we're excited to share this interview that we had with her.
Thanks for joining us, Anna, and thanks for listening.
Yeah.
Hi, we're here with Anna Curran, founder of Cookbook Create. Anna, can you tell me a little bit about Cookbook Create?
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here today talking with both of you. So one of the questions that I get asked a lot is, Anna, why did you found a company where anyone can make their own cookbooks? And it came from a personal passion. I was thinking a lot about technology and how technology touches our lives. And what are the ways that technology enriches our lives? And is it actually making our lives better, or is it making our lives worse? And I was looking through my mother's cookbook one day for this recipe that my grandmother used to make for my father when he was young. And I started thinking about this cookbook because it's something that had sat on the same shelf in our family kitchen for years. It was given to my mom back in 1969 by my aunt. And it had all of these recipes in there. There's a recipe from my great-grandmother. There's recipes from both sides of the family. My mom had added recipes from, my dad's side of the family in there. And I started looking at this cookbook and thinking, this is such a artifact of our family. And in so many ways, the story of our family told through these recipes. And what a powerful thing this cookbook was. It represented so many things about who we were as people and how we lived and who was important to us. At that moment in time, I'd been thinking a lot about, what are some ways that technology can actually enrich our lives? I was, sort of watching what was happening with social media. And it really seemed that everything was about more. It was about more likes, more friends, more shares, and people in the early days of Facebook, I sort of called it like the friend wars, where it was like, well, how many friends do you have? How many friends do you have? And, people were trying to have more friends on Facebook as if that was somehow a validation of who they were as a person, and then at the same time, I was watching those same people be at dinner parties and being stuck to their device and not paying attention to the people who were actually around them. And so,
yeah, that drives me batty.
There was this question of like, well, how connected to these people actually are you? And so I just been thinking a lot about connection and recognized the power of this cookbook. And what it brought up for me was the question of, what is the modern version of this book? How can you use social networking technology, and how can you use print-on-demand technology and configure it in a way that anyone can make a cookbook that's like this, that recognizes the relationships in their life, the food that's important to them, and their connections. And that was the spark of what inspired me to found Cookbook Create and to build the site where anyone can make their own cookbooks.
I love that. That is so neat. I don't think I realized that was kind of your mission, to create connection, even through generations, I guess, of people. I think that's awesome. One of the reasons why we asked Anna to come on today was because she did found this company, Cookbook Create, and I think it's such a lovely service. But I especially wanted her to talk about the history of cookbooks and how cookbooks have evolved, because I chatted with her at one point in time at a conference, and I was like, wow, she is full of so much information. So we've asked her to come on today specifically to talk about that. Can you tell us what the heck is a cookbook? Everybody knows what a cookbook is, right? I mean, but can you define that for us just from the beginning, and we'll go from there?
Absolutely. So it's actually not a dumb question at all. So when I was doing research design research to figure out what kind of custom software we needed to build to help anyone make their own cookbook, I looked at thousands and thousands of cookbooks, and I also looked at the history of cookbooks. And I sort of assumed that there would be probably maybe 2, 3, 4, maybe up to 5 different types of patterns of ways that cookbooks would be organized and formatted. And what I found was surprising. So what I found is there actually aren't too many universals in cookbooks, that they're very freeform and are organized in a lot of different methods. So if you look back to some of the oldest cookbooks that exist, the oldest cookbook that I know about is, I think, from 1700. It's a Mesopotamian book written on clay tablets. and, probably impractical for the home chef to have a clay tablet cookbook.
What are you talking about? That totally makes sense.
It probably can't get wet.
Yeah, you don't have to worry so much about splatter, but And then there's also another fairly old cookbook is from the 4th century AD. It's a Roman cookbook, and that cookbook, I think it has something between like 25 and 35 recipes in it. And
Quite a bit.
it's interesting. So there's a lot of stews in that. Actually, in the Mesopotamian cookbook, there are about 25 recipes for stew. What's interesting about that book is that it lists the ingredients, but no directions. So if you think about where cookbooks sort of started in history, at that point in time, you would learn cooking from doing and not necessarily by reading. So not very many people were literate at that point in time. And so the earliest cookbooks were typically for the people in society who were literate. And so often it was for the person that would cook for a wealthy household, and it needed to be somebody that was literate in order to be able to actually use this book.
So if they have all of those ingredients, then no direction, did everybody assume that they knew how to make a stew? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, well, if you look at some of the earlier manuscript cookbooks from U.S. history, so there's over at NYU, there's the Fales Library, and they have something like 56,000 cookbooks in their collection. And some of them are handwritten manuscripts from early American history. And these cookbooks are, think about like the personal version of, like Good Housekeeping or something. And so a lot of the earlier cookbooks, they contained not just recipes, but they were about home remedies. They had medicinal recipes, how to make tinctures and salves, and then also would deal with, how to clean the house. So it wasn't just cooking that was the focus. It also was generally how do you keep up a household and how do you keep all of the members in that household functioning and healthy.
So cooking was kind of apothecary too.
Exactly.
Oh, that's fun. That hits true to home for me.
Yeah, it's kind of all things domestic. You had to know how to take care of your household and more than just feed them.
That's absolutely it.
So you did mention literacy plays a huge role in how cookbooks have evolved. Can you talk a little bit about that? When people started going to school more, how did cookbooks and cooking change because of that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, I have to tell you, I learned a lot of my cooking from watching TV. And so that was by proxy. That was through watching on television, and so when you think about modern life and how is it that we learn to cook, often it is through television or it's through written recipes. And since, we aren't necessarily in the kitchen learning cooking from somebody who's making the dish right in front of us, recipes today have taken on a very different nature than they have historically. So if you think pre-industrial revolution, most cooking knowledge was passed by doing and not through the written word. And so you asked earlier, why are these recipes just lists of ingredients? Well, it was assumed that you know how to prepare things. So it would say prepare the asparagus would be the direction, but it doesn't say how. It doesn't say steam, chop, cut, grate. It doesn't give you any instruction. Does it mean peel? Does it mean wash it? It just says prepare the asparagus, assuming that the person reading it, it's code and that person already knows what that means. Whereas today, those types of recipes have become useless because you aren't learning how to prepare the asparagus by watching someone else making it. So you need it to be laid out. You need to have the specific methods detailed and to know how to interpret the recipes.
So would ever a head of household or maybe head chef, they really would just have all of that knowledge of how the head of the household, they like the way their asparagus is prepared. They just know that.
Yeah, they know that. I mean, well, because think about it, before we mandatorily had to spend our childhood in school, we spent our childhood in the household. And so, we were in the kitchen observing how things were made and participating in making the meal. And so, now that we're separated from that, we don't have how many hours, think of how many hours we spend at school. We would have been spending those hours at home in some capacity.
So what were the diets like back in these earlier days for these cookbooks that we were spending time in the household? People knew what they liked to have prepared. They were observing preparation. And so the cookbooks were basically ingredient lists. But what kind of ingredients were there? What were they eating?
So the ancient Roman cookbook that I was talking about, one of the things that was most fascinating to me is there's a recipe for hamburgers in there. So to me, I
really?
think about, yes, yes. So I think about hamburgers as sort of rising up out of the 1950s. That was sort of my preconception. And then to learn that, this is a food item that has, at least a 2,000-year history was notable to me. There's also a recipe that's like a chicken pot pie, kind of, and then there are some novelties like dormice and flamingo's tongue. Those have fallen out of favor. Yeah.
Flamingo's tongues?
I wonder where you would get them. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying that was a thing, and obviously they have fallen out of favor. But I've never thought of this, but you're right. Things kind of have a season or when they're trendy or popular.
Yeah. So, Pinterest might bring back flamingo's tongue. We don't know. But yeah, one of the things actually, when you look at the history of ingredients and what was available, I think, there's sort of like a couple key moments in food history. So, and the first big key moment, I think, really is Industrial Revolution. So it's when canning becomes available, and then also, when refrigeration becomes available. So those two things fundamentally changed how we can eat and what we can eat and how long that food stays edible. So when you look back to the early American cookbooks, even, you see this, the list of things that were prepared to be eaten is much wider than what we define as edible today. So, we have certain types of fish that we consider edible. They would eat everything. Anything that you could catch, anything that you could prepare, they would figure out a way to eat it. I remember growing up as a kid, I had a copy of, I think it was my grandmother's Joy of Cooking, and it sort of fell apart over the years. And so, unfortunately, I think we let go of that. But I remember when we got the new one, my mother had noted that the recipe for squirrel was not in the new version.
Yes.
My jaw is dropped. I'm like, squirrel? What? Really? The new edition does not have squirrel.
Well, squirrel soup, squirrel stew is popular in certain parts of the country still, but not as much. That's kind of out in the country where people hunt and forage and things like that. So yeah, squirrel's not really common if you're in a big city anymore.
Have you ever had squirrel soup or stew?
Yeah, once. I'm from
Really?
Louisiana.
You have, Sharon.
Yeah.
I learn so much more every day from Sharon.
But yes, I'll agree. It's not popular. Nobody's setting out traps or anything like that.
Does it taste good?
Chickenish,
Chickeny.
Yeah. Like the dark
So
meat.
in Florida, they have the possum festival, and I'm not actually sure if it's like you can see possums or if you eat them. I don't know. I haven't gone, but you might want to put that on your list.
Yeah, well, we might have to put that on our list.
Winter has a thing for possums.
Yeah, my daughter has a stuffed possum teddy bear thing. Yeah, it's fun. Well, Anna, I think this is really interesting because I remember when I was growing up, my dad, I would pull out dandelions because I thought they were weeds, but he took them and he made stew out of them at one point in time. They were the greens in a soup, and I think we ate them in a salad one time too. And I think dandelion greens fell out of favor as a thing that you could eat, but now I feel like it's coming back. It's becoming more trendy again to eat some of those greens that are not.
Yeah, they're very bitter in taste. Do you remember how bitter they were?
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
But they were edible.
Well, they're edible and they're actually incredibly good for you. So, I think that there's one of the interesting trends that I've been following is there's a lot of scientific research that's going on different food items. And so the National Institute of Health has been doing a lot of research around particular folkloric remedies and cures. So turmeric, ginger, garlic, dandelion. I don't know if specifically they've studied dandelion, but, there are researchers who are proving out the health benefits that, we've only sort of had these not really old wives' tales, but we've only had this folkloric tradition around. And, what's been fascinating to see is that ever since probably around 2000, there's been a lot of attention in the scientific community, sort of driven by the advancement in research that they're able to do, and they've been able to look at things like turmeric and link that to, you can't go anywhere without seeing a recipe for golden milk and the health benefits.
Yes. Pinterest.
Have you guys tried golden milk?
I haven't tried golden milk, but I've had turmeric tea quite a bit. Like I make my own turmeric tea. There's no milk in it though. It's just like turmeric and honey basically with some pepper and lemon.
Yeah, I've never had it before. What did you call it? Golden milk?
Yeah, golden milk. So it's turmeric with coconut milk, and often they have you put pepper with it because the pepper helps you absorb the healthiest chemicals that are in turmeric. So the National Institute of Health, they developed what's called the ORAC scale, and that basically, it's a measurement scale to see how much antioxidant properties particular food items have by weight. And turmeric is the most highest, antioxidant property food item out of anything. And one of the things that sparked all of this medical research into turmeric was they were doing studies, population studies on incidence of lung cancer. And they were actually looking at the air quality and linking the outdoor air quality to prevalence of lung cancer. And what they saw was that there were certain areas where they expected to see really high lung cancer rates, but actually they saw very low lung cancer rates. And what they were able to figure out is that turmeric was a major component of the diet there. And so they started doing research into turmeric, and they found that turmeric actually interrupts all 4 stages of cancer for lung cancer. So it interrupts cells turning cancerous. It interrupts once a cell turns cancerous from multiplying. It interrupts blood vessels from going into a tumor, and it also interrupts metastasis. So it's actually not very surprising to me that it's, one of the top trends that Google has named, in the food space, because people are starting to learn that foods have all of these really incredibly beneficial properties.
That's kind of cool to think about. Think of the history of cookbooks in the past and how different they are, but I've never thought of it like, yeah, it's totally changing now too because of things that we're learning from science and trends and Pinterest. Like all these little things kind of play into the change of how cookbooks and cooking is changing. Can I go back to when you said the Industrial Revolution? So basically the landscape then is what's happening. More people are becoming literate and going to school.
Going to school, going to work, think about, you don't have to make everything yourself. You can purchase things that are made, and then there's also, think about the amount of work that it takes to make your own fresh pasta from scratch versus buying boxed pasta. So think about how much work that takes out of your daily life in terms of food preparation. So when you start seeing these economies of scale and you start seeing, that goods are widely available, it really dramatically changes how a person prepares food, what they can prepare, and how much time and effort it takes.
convenience is wonderful. I think it's great. I appreciate being able to go to the store, but it does kind of make me a little sad that kids are going off to school and not spending as much time next to whoever's cooking in the house and losing the skills that they would learn in that situation. So just a side note, kind of makes me a little sad.
Yeah, it also means excess of calories. So I was talking with the librarian over at the Fales collection, and I asked her, tell me about the history of dieting in the context of cookbooks. When did you first see diet cookbooks? Was it at a particular point in time? And she said, yeah, right around the Industrial Revolution. So there weren't necessarily excess calories to be had prior to that. And then all of a sudden, people have this excess. They also have a different lifestyle, where they're not forced. I mean, think of how many calories you probably burn making fresh pasta by yourself without a machine. You've got to roll it, you've got to mix it, all of these different parts.
Time consuming, you're using arm strength. I mean, you're bent over your counters or whatever, prep tables and things like that. Yeah, for sure.
You're on your feet, you're not sitting at a computer staring at a screen. And so, our lives are different. And so I was asking also, because I was curious, like the Atkins diet, is that a new concept, or Tim Ferriss's 4-hour body or whatever he has? Is that new, or is that just marketing? Is that just repackaging? And what she said was there sort of were like these similar concepts in dieting that have been repackaged over time as different things. Probably around like 1900 was when you start to really see cookbooks that address the need to be dieting or to be calorie restricting.
Diet cookbooks, man. So it became a problem because the lifestyle changed dramatically. And I'm assuming then that people were not hunting squirrel. They basically could have whatever was available that they could buy at the store. And so because of this excess calories, people are getting fatter, right?
Yeah, I mean, you don't really see that until after the 70s when sugar intake
increases,
has gone way up. And then the portion sizes have gone way up. Like I love to go vintage shopping. I don't know about you guys if you ever go to the vintage stores, but I could spend hours looking at old glassware and barware and old silverware. What is this thing for? Why, but the size of their glasses are tiny. The size of their plates are tiny. And when you see what used to be considered a full portion for them, you're really sort of struck with, what is it, like a gallon Slurpee that you can get nowadays?
Yes.
I mean, they might be up to 3 gallons by now. I haven't seen the sizes recently. I don't know.
It's crazy. Okay, so when you say that these diet books kind of were showing up, and it wasn't necessarily because of corpulence or, there's excess calories, but was it to help people lose weight, or what were these diet books? Were they to help people with their general well-being? I'm not totally sure what diet books mean.
Yeah, so I think that there's sort of 2 approaches to dieting, and I think one of them is weight loss. And so it's more what I would say, sometimes it's vanity driven and sometimes it's health driven. And, I was just curious when I was in conversation with the librarian over at Fales, asking her, what's the history of diets in America? And when did they first come about? And how have they changed over time? When did they first start to appear? And so, I feel like in this day and age, there's so many different diets. It's very confusing. People don't know, like, is this healthy? Is this not healthy? And the truth is that the answer is yes. It can be both healthy and unhealthy. You have to take into consideration what the individual person needs and what they might have excess of and what they might not have enough of, and so we want to think about food and diet, and like diet meaning the sum total of what you eat, not a way to restrict calories. We ought to be thinking about diet in terms of like health styles. So, and some people have predispositions to certain health conditions. So if there's a predisposition to heart disease or to diabetes, then there are particular dietary things that you should be aware of.
That makes more sense to be more of a lifestyle decision or cookbook. Okay, so cookbooks have changed because of the Industrial Revolution. Those ones looked like they did have ingredient lists as well as directions, correct?
So cookbooks are not as universal as you might think. So like if you take a given year and look at all of the cookbooks that came out in that year, you'll see cookbooks arranged in all different manners, written in all different ways. Some have more directions, some have less directions. So it's really very individual to the particular author and how they're writing their book.
With that in mind, how everybody has a different idea and can express the same thing in many different ways, is there such a thing as an original recipe?
So it's a really, really interesting question. Is there such a thing as an original recipe? I was shocked when I started reading about this ancient Roman cookbook and the fact that it has the hamburger recipe in it. And I thought to myself, wow, like I thought that was something that had recently been invented. And then I started thinking about, well, food items in larger historical context. And to be an invention, it has to be a completely new creation. So think about if these are ingredients that people have been eating for a long time, and so are the other ingredients in a dish, chances are that somebody has thought of the same combination, especially if it tastes good, and has come up with it. So, I've heard story after story of bloggers, food bloggers who, these are people who think about how can I develop a new and creative version of this recipe, right? And so they're even trying to just riff off of something that's already known, but in a unique way. And I've heard time and time again that someone will say like, oh, I just came up with the most original idea. And then they post it and then search it and see, oh, there's already 10 other people who have already thought of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I assume that I'm sure there's no lawsuit that's ever been won on a recipe.
No, there's actually never been a lawsuit that's been won on recipe copyright infringement.
How have cookbooks kind of changed going into, I want to say, into the 20th century then? I think of the 1940s and 50s where it was very housewifey and, like you said, ladies' home journal. How did that change from where it once was in the Industrial Revolution? How did the format of cookbooks and who the audience was change?
Yeah, so I mean, that's an interesting question. Like, think about cookbooks reflect who we are and they reflect what's going on in the moment. Like I remember looking at this cookbook from the 1950s and it gave instructions on, to make sure that you did your hair and you looked nice when your husband came home, vomit, 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 and all of these other things and don't complain to him and don't tell him how hard your day was. Just look pretty and ask questions and have a full meal ready. So that cookbook very much reflects the culture at the time and how people thought women should behave, or maybe how men wanted women to behave. I'm not really sure who these women were or if they actually did behave that way, but that's maybe a topic for a different podcast.
Times have changed.
Well, yeah, I definitely think equal rights and, women's rights have definitely changed the landscape of many things. And I think cookbooks would be no exception. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're buying cookbooks now and I don't think anyone would dare say, make sure that you have makeup on and the kids have clean faces when your husband comes home. That's just thankfully, that's not a thing anymore. Now that we're in, I don't know, the 21st century, what's the future of cookbooks? Where do you see it going?
One of the things that you can see is the rise of single subject cookbooks. So people will have these just sort of passionate obsessions with particular food items. So a grilled cheese cookbook or a waffle cookbook, you name it, the food item, there's a cookbook dedicated to that single subject because there are people who are that fanatical and obsessed with, that particular thing. So, that's an interesting trend that we've seen in cookbooks. I mean, I think that sort of indicates one of the larger themes that's going on, which is this move towards personalization. So instead of mass, here's the one cookbook that matters for everyone, it's here's how I do this. And that it's not just one monolithic way. The other trend that I see so much is it's a race in two directions at once, which is how can we eat the healthiest and how can we be the most decadent and indulgent?
Yes. It gets so tiring because you feel like a yo-yo. You're just going back and forth constantly. Like, eat clean, but let's eat all the junk because it's so good.
Yeah. I mean, what's your favorite indulgent recipe?
Mine's probably macaroni and cheese. You can riff it so many ways. I haven't made it in forever because I can't eat that very much.
I mean, mac and cheese is such a classic.
I'm trying to think of what I would think is super amazing. It's probably a Chinese dish. We usually do something called char siu pork, and it's really good. It's got a lot of
like pork belly, or
it's not pork belly. It's usually a pork shoulder, but the way we've done it, we put it into the slow cooker and finish it off under the broiler to get the crispy bits. So I think also, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the advent of all of the internet, everything with the internet, the YouTube, the Pinterest, everything has changed the way we handle cookbooks. Because I will tell you this right now, I have many cookbooks, don't get me wrong. But nowadays I find that a lot of times I gravitate to grabbing my phone or my computer and finding a recipe from an online cookbook in a sense, or go to a blogger's website. So I feel like that's maybe what I think everybody's doing, but do people still buy cookbooks? Do people still have a physical copy of recipes nowadays?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So there's actually two categories of books that are still growing while the rest are declining. And those categories are cookbooks, number one. Wow. And then can you guess what the other category is? Think like Star Trek, although that's not a book, sci-fi.
Yeah.
So sci-fi and cookbooks are the two categories of books that people are still purchasing more and more. So if you think about how we interact with recipes, the internet has dramatically changed the way that we look for and find recipes. So when you are looking for a recipe online, you're searching for something. So you may start with a concept. You may start with, I need a chicken recipe for dinner. And you might type that into Google, or you might go to your favorite cooking website and look it up. We have a recipe community where, all of our site members have contributed their own recipes that they want to share. So you might come to Cookbook Create and type in chicken and start looking to see what are some ways that you can prepare chicken for dinner. Whereas like if you're using a cookbook, you have to see what has been curated in that book. And so, when we were doing some behavioral research, what we found is that if people are using recipes from online, the picture is really, really important to that recipe being used, more so than if it's in a cookbook. So people are more likely to trust recipes with no picture from a printed cookbook versus online. So the online recipes, we really want to have a preview of what is this going to look like when I cook it.
Yes, the visual aspect is it's important to me when I go online. So, but you're right. When I go pull open a cookbook, I'm like, oh, look, there's a recipe for chicken. There it is. I'm just going to make that. But usually they have pretty pictures as well. I've noticed nowadays there's a lot more visual in the current cookbooks as well.
Yeah. And as a tribute to online culture, and online culture changed how people were looking for recipes. And then it actually changed how cookbooks look today. So cookbooks now are much more visual. They're much more colorful. They tend to be in full color with lots of photographs. Whereas if you look at cookbooks from, even that were produced in the 90s, they're very different. And some of the other, sort of changes that really impact that are digital photography. So now it's so much easier for somebody to cook something in their own kitchen, have good enough lighting, be able to style the food themselves and take a photograph. Whereas, it used to take a team of 7 to 10 people to get 5 photographs in one day that they would be able to use for a cookbook. So the amount of labor intensity to produce pictures for professional cookbooks has changed quite a lot as well.
I've never thought of digital photography being a huge factor in that. I also think of the cookbooks, a couple of the cookbooks I have in my collection, and those are from people that are bloggers, for example, and they probably didn't have a team of 7 people to take their pictures. They probably did them all themselves. I also want to ask a kind of an off question. Well, it's kind of related to this. How has the celebrity chef affected the cookbook world? It just seems like there's so many, everybody's a celebrity chef or cook or something like that. Has that changed how cookbooks are being purchased, marketed, written?
Yeah, so I mean, that's like a great question. I think there's celebrities who have their own cookbooks. There's celebrity chefs who have their cookbooks. There's restaurants that have their own cookbooks. And, you know, I think what we're seeing today is that everybody has something to say about food. We all love food and have a lot to share about it. And so I think it's exciting that there's so many people that want to share their stories around food and that are passionate enough to say, I want to share my way of living with you. Here's how I do it. And, you know, and I'd love to have you be able to do that too.
I've never thought of it that way. Stories are a huge part of the food. So Anna, thanks so much for coming on today. That was so interesting. I had no idea. Like, I really totally ignorant about how cookbooks have evolved. And I want to thank you. I just want to let our audience members know that this is only the first of the of 3 interviews that we're going to do with Anna, because there are so many things about cookbooks and recipes and how you can curate your own recipes. I think it's going to be a really fun series. So please join us for the next 2 and 3 episodes after this. And then Sharon's going to share something about a little special offer.
Anna has generously offered our listeners a surprise. So go to the show notes at hungrysquared.com and we'll put a link in there for you guys to find out what your surprise is. And I just want to thank you for coming on the show today, Anna. This was so fun. I love how connection is at the heart of food and these cookbooks, you know, family cookbooks, cookbooks through the ages. I just love that connection's all just at the core.
Thanks so much again, Anna. And once again, check out, if you'd like to make your own personalized cookbook, go over to cookbookcreate.com and check them out there. And then once again, go to the show notes at hungrysquared.com. Thanks everybody for joining us. And thanks again, Anna.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Let's have a food fight.
Food fight, food fight, food fight, food fight. It's winter.
This is the segment where you can email us with your relationship questions relating to food. You can email us at hungrysquared@gmail.com.
Disclaimer, we are in no way professional relationship experts, but you should totally listen to us anyway. If you need professional help, please seek it out.
Food fight, food fight, food fight. The food fight segment of the show. Here we go.
Winter, where's this week's question from?
We got listener mail.
Ooh.
Yeah, another question. And it's actually, she kind of refers to something else. So I wanted to read the email as well as her question. So she says, "Hello, ladies. I'm listening to your pantry episode. I was listening to your pantry episode the other day. At one point, the discussion turned to the use of tomato paste versus tomato sauce. Partly due to pantry space, I started leaving tomato sauce off my shopping list. These days, when I need tomato sauce, I thin out a can of tomato paste with some water or broth or wine. So my question is this: other than concentration, is there a difference between tomato sauce and paste, or am I committing a culinary faux pas? Thanks, ladies." And she signed. This is from Helena. And she actually gave us a nice little tip. I'm going to just read the rest of it. It was a PS. "My tip for depth of flavor is not tomato paste, but anchovies. They don't leave a flavor in tomato dishes and they dissolve completely. They seem to really bind all the flavors together."
Ooh.
Anchovies. That's a real,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to try that.
Thanks, Helena.
Yeah. Okay. So what do you think? What do you buy? What do you have in your pantry?
I have both.
You do? Okay.
Yeah, well, so I like, if I'm going to make my own pasta sauce or spaghetti sauce. Well, I guess that's pasta sauce. I mean, pizza sauce.
Oh, yeah.
Like my own marinara.
Mm-hmm.
I like just getting whole canned tomatoes.
Oh.
Like a 28-ounce can of the whole tomatoes.
Mm-hmm.
And they come in some liquid and I'll just crush them either with my hands or with a spoon.
Mm-hmm.
and I'll make sauce that way and just add my own seasonings and let it kind of cook down and concentrate the flavor that way. I also have tomato paste. That's mostly as an ingredient. I use it for a lot of different things. When I make Indian food or like a curry type things, I'll also use it in some pasta dishes. I'll make it, use it for making condiments, that kind of thing. I've never tried to make a sauce from the paste though, but I like what she said about thinning it out with like wine or broth.
Yeah.
I think that would be a really good flavor.
I think that I agree. I believe the only difference between, and she's asking if it's a culinary faux pas, but I don't think
I don't
it is.
think it's a culinary
No,
faux pas
I
at
think-
all. I think you just have to season.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think tomato paste is a very concentrated version of a tomato puree.
Yes,
Because
it is.
you know how thick that is, right? I mean, you have to spoon that out. Now with the tomato sauce though, so you could thin out a tomato paste like you said, Helena. And then I would say the only difference is though, if you look at the back of a tomato sauce can, there's usually some ingredients for seasoning.
Yeah, so if you buy a store-bought jarred sauce, Classico, that's my family's favorite, just for those store-bought jarred sauces. I can't say that fast. But like anything like that or Prego or something like that, you're going to have a lot of additives like sugar for to make it sweeter, but also preservatives.
I was also
stuff.
going to say probably to cut back on the acidity of just the straight tomato paste
Yes.
too. I mean, because that stuff is just puree. So I think you can do it the way you've done it. Thin it out to your desired consistency and then just add flavoring. Now be judicious, obviously, with your flavoring at the beginning. You want to make sure that you're getting where you need to get to without going overboard.
Yeah, it's important if it's the star of the show, if it's the star of your dish, versus if your tomato sauce is more of an ingredient in a bigger dish. If you're making spaghetti
Versus
chili,
yeah,
something like that.
Yeah.
Or maybe pizza or something where there's a bunch of other ingredients and you could still be using some more seasonings later on. You know, you're going to want to cut back on that.
Yeah.
But if it's the star of the show, if you're making spaghetti or a bolognese or something like that, you're going to want to have some more seasonings and have it be more on point.
Yeah. But I think that there's possibilities of having it be a little bit healthier even because I feel
for sure.
I feel like the tomato sauces that you can get may add a bit more than you would. I'm not totally sure what the milligrams of.
Well, we don't always know the ratios, and it's hard to say like, oh, well, this has 8 grams of sugar per serving. Is that okay?
Yeah.
That's
so
a little high.
Yeah. So I think that you can go ahead and use your best judgment. I mean, heck, you're putting anchovies and stuff. That's cool. Like maybe use that in your tomato sauce. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think Lee loves to use paprika in a lot of things because you can get, especially like the smoked paprika.
Oh, I love smoked paprika.
So that can kind of bring out some flavor depth there. Obviously oregano, if you're going for more of an Italian flavor, salt, obviously salt and sugar will definitely help things out. Anything else that you like to put in?
You'd be surprised at how nutmeg or clove could warm up tomato.
Okay. So
It's nice.
give those a try. Oh, and garlic salt, onion salt. I'm all about those too. So, but yeah, it's not a culinary faux pas.
I think it's culinarily creative.
I think it's very smart actually
Mhm.
because it's saving you space. And I feel like it's a little cheaper to get those little cans of paste.
Oh, it totally is. And they save really well. So a lot of times if you're following a recipe that calls for tomato paste, rarely does it ever call for a whole can.
Yeah.
Because that's a lot of tomato paste. But if you're making your own sauce, then you'd want a whole can.
Yeah.
But if you're only using like a tablespoon or two, it saves really well in the freezer.
Oh, okay.
Just put it
Noted.
in like a sandwich baggie or whatever and mark it, but it freezes really well.
Okay. Well,
for a few months.
I'm going to have to remember that because I don't think I actually end up usually throwing it out because I forget about it.
Yeah.
Oops. Okay. I think that's good.
Thanks, Helena. Thanks for joining us today on our show. You can find us at hungrysquare.com on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play Music.
Hey guys, Have you subscribed to our podcast?
Do it.
You
Hit
have.
subscribe.
You have, haven't you? Okay, well, thanks, first of all. And then second of all, have you shared it with your other podcast-loving friends? This month is the National Sharing Podcast Month.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I think it is. And they have a hashtag called Trypod, TRYPOD, like try out a podcast. And so we'd love for you to share it, tweet it out, Instagram it, Facebook, shout out. That'd be cool. We'd appreciate that.
It's basically trying to make other people aware of podcasts and what they are.
Exactly. And so, because a lot of people still don't know what it is. And you guys are in the know because you're listening to us right now. You know what a podcast is. You're no dummies.
Yeah. You've been listening to them since before they were cool.
Yeah, before cereal. Cereal's cool. But I'm just saying, you're in the know.
Yeah.
So share it with others if you can. That would be so awesome. We'd give you a high five. Yeah, we totally just gave you a high five. Anyway, but thanks. We are excited to talk to you next week on our next episode of Food Nerdery.
Okay, love you. Bye.
Bye.
Hungry squared, yeah, hungry squared.